which is, part of our, part of the holdings here that, the family has invested in sort of upkeeping through the trusts, and, the businesses have always respected that. But just, all of the rest of the mangroves that stretch further north, there's a lot to be done in terms of conserving, preserving, ensuring that, they thrive. So we're hoping that we can do that also as we move forward and make investments in biodiversity and climate change. Uja, should we begin?
Yes. So we've gotten ahead of ourselves. So we are beginning this webinar. We have Vivek Gilani with us, who we are hosting today, and Gayatri Divecha is going to have this conversation with Vivek. So a little bit about Vivek. Vivek is an environmental engineer. He went on to pursue his master's in environmental engineering from the University of Massachusetts. There he worked with a couple of consulting firms, and then he returned in 2009. And he co-founded C-Balance, which is a company that helps calculate carbon footprint of other organizations, and then devises strategies and ways on how to mitigate their carbon impact through their operations. And as a director of C-Balance, he was also appointed with the mission of greening the Indian Premier League. And he has also been involved in green initiatives at the Shanghai World Expo. He is also the director of Fair Conditioning Program, which is actually looking at making cooling solutions a non-negotiable value. And also the Fair Travel Program, which is working with India's top IT companies and redesigning their travel policies and business practices to help them cut their emissions with business travel. And another very interesting thing Vivek does is he's a part of the Informed Voter Project, which is actually holding elected representatives of Mumbai and Pune accountable for their actions, their promises, and what they're actually doing in the parliament, and checking upon their performance, and making that information available to voters everywhere. And with Vivek, we have Gayatri Divecha. For those of you who don't know, Gayatri Divecha heads Good and Green, which is basically the CSR and sustainability function for Godrej Industries Limited and associate companies. And she's spearheading Godrej Group's vision of building an inclusive and equitable greener world. And she's driving initiatives to help us be net zero by 2035, supporting India's goal to eliminate malaria by 2030, and improve key agricultural commodity value chains, and transform plastic and solid waste management in markets where we operate. Over to you, Gayatri, to take this conversation ahead with Vivek. We are very excited for what's in place.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you for introducing us and putting this together. Vivek, really thanks for taking the time out. I think, I have a bunch of questions that I'm really keen on asking you. Some of them, will be, of course, how you manage to achieve things like greening the IPL and so on. But, others also around how you find the time to do all of this. So please let us in on your secrets. So I have a few questions, everybody who's participating, we will open up for questions towards the end of the hour. But in the meanwhile, if you do have questions, just pop them in the chat and we will weave them in. So please do feel free. Vivek, let's dive right in. You're doing so many things on a topic that is of course of not just it's not just the topic of the hour, but it's also, I don't think we underestimate just how urgent it is for us to take action. It seems that climate change is this this sort of fictitious character that may or may not arrive at our doorstep, but it is here. And we do need to act as, corporates, as citizens, as elected representatives. So, from the perspective of, all of the work you've done in sustainability and, mitigating sort of climate change and people's impact and institutions' impact on climate change, as well as in this work on civic action, can you tell us a bit about what are those big challenges? What makes you worried, and what keeps you up at night when you think about, oh my God, how are we going to solve for this?
Well, thanks a lot for that, Gayatri. Yes, it is an existential crisis. It is not, it is unlike anything else in the realm of a social, earthquake or in the realm of anything to do with our culture. Of course, these are all important factors. We need a revolution in our cultural practices and our social practices, but none of those really have a clock on them. Yeah. So when it comes to issues of, say, education or issues of gender equity, etc., there's of course intersectionality, but none of them really have a clock. But for this existential issue, there is a clock. And the clock is really running out. Anybody who tracks the daily ppm level of CO2 knows, like if you go to the Guardian newspaper, for example, every 2 months it ticks by 0.1 ppm. It's astonishing how real, and like you correctly said, Gayatri, Bill McKibben says, that it's time to stop calling it an environmental threat. It's an environmental reality. It's a threat means exactly like you said, it may or may not happen. It sounds like a Hollywood script when you say it's a threat, but it's the menace is here. And we don't need to read any books. We don't need any statistics. It's felt. We all can connect the dots. Even if the media doesn't connect the dots for us, we know what's happening in Delhi. We know what the floods that happen in Kerala. We know the floods that happen in Mumbai. All of this is part of the escalation. And it's not just, and then there is the global heat wave that is currently going on. And we can be in denial about the linkages and whether this is truly anthropogenic, human-caused climate change, etc. But I think anybody who really wants to live an honest and moral life can no longer deny this. So yeah, it's a great challenge. What keeps me up at night? I have a few themes that really are the undercurrent of what I believe I'm doing as part of a group. I don't want this to come across as some great hero story. I want to situate myself in a collective action. I think the days of individual heroes that are leading the way, I think those are all old industrial fantasies, and I think this needs to be a revolution amongst everybody who's here and who's not here. So one thing that really keeps me up is the idea of accountability, that we are living in a world where wealth and power is increasingly getting concentrated in the hands of a few, and it's affecting our democracy and our ecology. Most of us think of this as a political issue that is only affecting our democracy, but a ruptured democracy where we don't hold the powerful accountable, powerful corporations, powerful citizens, and also the government's own departments and the ministries. If the democracy is ruptured, everything unspools. Everything gets undone. So I think this is a big part of what keeps me up, and almost everything that I do eventually somehow links to the idea of accountability for one's actions. Yeah. And the second that really keeps me up a lot is this delusion of green growth. The fact that there is still this thinking that maybe capitalism has one last turn. Maybe we can green capitalism. Maybe we can just put renewable energy into everything, and we will manage this growth so that it doesn't wreck the planet. And somebody very famously has said that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. So what really keeps me up is this fantasy of green capitalism, of a safe, infinite growth pathway. Another thing that I think is important that keeps me up is the idea of equity. And I know that you mentioned this, that you also want to do this in an equitable manner. And very often, in these kinds of discourses, when there is a contentious sort of space that you get into, usually you say that, hey, you know what, for development, for India to be lifted out of poverty, we need development and growth of a certain, scale and a certain sort of imperative speed, 8%, 9%. And they always use phrases like, you need to break some eggs to make some omelets, and what really keeps me up at night is routinely, historically, whose eggs get broken and who gets to eat those omelets are usually two different sets of people. So what really also creates a sense of urgency is we really need an environmentalism of the poor, kind of like what Sunita Narayan has been alluding to, which is that when you speak to the indigenous people, when you speak to Adivasis, when you speak to the people who are really have historically been taking care of the land and are the best stewards of the land, they usually side with the ecology versus extraction of resources. So they're not the ones who are clamoring for 8% growth. It is somebody else who's clamoring for 8% growth. And we are saying this, that it's for them. But when you speak to those communities, yes, they do want economic development, but not at the cost of the ecology. And I think what keeps me up is that the ones who are getting to speak and shape the agenda, the discourse of even development and of sustainability are, I think, putting words into the mouths of these communities. And finally, I think what also I find a challenge in the kind of work we do is this magical faith in market solutions delivering everything, and I think we need to recognize that what we are currently witnessing are the failures of the market. This inordinate faith, this dogmatic faith that market solutions will fix all the market failures, negates the wisdom of Audre Lorde, when she said the master's tools will never break the master's house. We need different tools. We need tools that go beyond the market and directly address prosperity and well-being rather than doing it through the trickle-down, economics. And I think we need to really address that in the work we do. And finally, I'll say one thing that really keeps me up at night is this fetish of creating more intellectual property, even in the world of sustainability and green. Companies who are creating these solutions want to still hold on to it as a differentiator, as a USP. And I think it's too late now to keep doing intellectual property based work in the realm of climate and sustainability. I think there should be no copyrights, really. There should be a right to copy or the copy left, so that all the knowledge, all the wisdom, insights that are being generated by the practitioners, it's in the public domain, and sustainability is no longer seen as a differentiator. It should be, I think, a non-negotiable value. And the bigger corporations need to help the smaller corporations get to that place and not compete on that front. So some things that really animate my thinking around these issues. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's really sort of given us a lot of food for thought, both as, a conglomerate, but also as citizens of this world and a collective who have, agency and can do something about this. You mentioned that, the time for individual action is over and it's really time for, this to be community-led, right? Yeah. And it's about communities speaking for themselves and taking action. We focused quite a bit, both as an individual corporate citizen, but also as individual employees on what can we do in our homes, in our day-to-day lives. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective, especially the work you're doing in civic action and civic engagement? How can we get our own communities involved? It's so difficult sometimes, like in my building, to even get people to agree to me buying a composting sort of a solution and running that for the building. So how can we, go from that individual mindset to influencing communities around and pushing for change?
Yeah. It's interesting. George Monbiot once wrote this piece a few years ago. And by the way, anybody who's not heard of George Monbiot or doesn't read him, please, I would advocate. I'm not going to give too much advice about what to do, but I think this person is one of the sanest voices. He actually says that neoliberalism has conned us into fighting climate change as individuals. Not that individual action is not important, but we really need to weigh the tokenism of, saving every paper wrapper and plastic wrapper and being obsessed with that, of living this perfect green life. But like you said, ignoring the fact that we need to organize. So, a few years ago in 2009, when I came to India, we really thought that individual green conscious consumption will be enough. If we all just use the rupee to vote in a way, like we decide what to buy, and that decision will liberate us and will emancipate us from this crisis. That was naive thinking on my part, for sure. And we at that time had this thinking that we need to realize our carbon footprint, we need to minimize our carbon footprint, and then we need to neutralize. So we'd come up with this realize, minimize, neutralize, almost like some sort of a poetry around this. But now at least we need to add a third eyes, which is organize. We really need to organize. And I think that the ultimate structure that we can start with, if we have never done anything public, is in our buildings or in our street. So one direct thing that we could be all doing is recognizing that, first of all, your carbon emissions are directly related to your wealth. Even if you consider yourself a minimalist, I've come across many people in these years, people who say that, oh, you know what, but I only have 10 pairs of clothes, and I only have, say travel once every year, I go for a vacation and so on. So all very good. Yeah, it's all required. But we don't recognize often that the savings of the money, once you make a certain amount of money, all that money that is not being spent is being saved somewhere in a bank usually. And those banks use it to further the growth of extractive industries very often. Most of the banks invest in fossil fuels, most Indian banks for sure. And that is also something that is attributable to you, actually. So your money is doing that work against your overt initiatives, even if you're not aware of it. So I think we need to, as individuals, we need to definitely form groups within our housing societies or within our streets. And one framework that I found very useful, Gayatri, is what's called the Carbon Reduction Action Group. We're actually using the same idea in the IT companies. What we found is very powerful is to create these groups that cut across socioeconomic privilege. So imagine a group on your street that is, say, composed of 20 to 40 to 50 people, something around that size, something manageable, where you can meet across the boundaries of privilege, across the boundaries of caste, across the boundaries of religion, gender, etc. And these are mixed groups that collectively say that, listen, we can set a target as a group over time to reduce our emissions. But what that will first force us to do is to recognize that most of us who earn beyond, say, 30,000 rupees a month, who fly around once in a while to go for vacations or for work, and we have an electricity bill more than 1,000 rupees, we are all hiding behind the poor. There is this notion that Indians are green because of our traditions and because my grandmom, saves every plastic bag and every dabba that comes into my home. And we walk around with this notion that we are greener than the rest of the world. But we've done carbon footprinting of most middle and upper middle class Indians. It is on par with the footprints of Western Europeans and Americans very often. So I think what these mixed groups of people can do is it first exposes the idea that there is hiding behind the poor going on. The footprint of the ones who are working for you is nothing compared to your footprint. So rather than this becoming a process of educating them, it's actually educating yourself about how is it that they are managing to have a happy. Of course, they need to earn more, they need to consume more, but how are they still able to find contentment and peace and well-being despite not producing so much of an impact on the earth? So I think that's what it'll do. It'll also help us differentiate between subsistence emissions and luxury emissions. What I've often found is that we are going after subsistence emissions, like the chulha, the cooking gas, and the little bit of water that we need to use for washing our utensils, etc. I've heard this refrain so many times. I keep telling my bai to reduce water usage because they don't understand, how much of an impact it's causing. But the problem is not that is subsistence emissions. What we really need to do is we need to cut down luxury emissions. The large cars, the large homes with large school spaces, the frequent flying to foreign destinations or even destinations within India, which can be taken by train. I think we really need to become smarter about this difference between the kind of CO2 molecules. Even I used to believe that all CO2 molecules are equal. They are not. The CO2 molecule for subsistence purposes from a bus to go to work is different from the CO2 molecules emerging from a large car taking a vice president of a company to their headquarters. So I think this is what we really need to be doing, is to collectively look at the issue of impact as a group and set targets as a group, and then see through routine negotiation, how can we be sharing the burden? How can the ones who've done a lot of the damage share a greater part of the burden, whereas the ones who are in our infancy in terms of consumption, kind of like what's happening globally. India is in its infancy in a way, if you look at historical emissions. Can we replicate that same negotiated, differentiated, but common responsibilities approach in our streets? I don't know if that sounds doable, but I feel that that's a way forward. Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic sort of very sharp input, is buildings and our streets, right? If we can get that and persist in these two spaces, that already takes us a really long way. I'm going to ask you, Vivek, if you can tell us a bit about your experience with greening the IPL. Where how did that work? I mean, of course, as much as you can share, but how did that work? How did this very large sort of collective of teams and so on come together, and commit to various actions to reduce their carbon footprint and other sort of environmental impacts?
Yeah. So I have to first qualify that program. It started off with a lot of euphoria and really belief that, imagine if somebody like Sachin Tendulkar talks and uses the word carbon footprint first of all on television. Yeah, what that would do, what kind of tectonic shift that would create amongst all the people who consider that person as a cultural icon, and for whether we are at peace with it or not, whether we are congruent with our thinking, that does hold a lot of sway. So the thinking around that time was the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, had what's called, I think it still has it, called the Sports and Environment Unit, and they felt that these discourses can be built in society by the sports stars, because they sort of cut across language, they cut across all kinds of proclivities, the left and the right, the rabid ecologist and often the rabid capitalist usually follow cricket in India. And they thought that this would be the connecting medium. So they signed an agreement with the Indian Premier League, not the individual franchises. The idea was, let's start with a central organization. And let's first do a comprehensive footprint of a sporting event in India. It had never happened. So we almost had to create our own methodology for doing this. There's so many images that come to mind. I remember after cricket matches, after everybody would go home, I often, because I was developing the methodology, I was in charge of doing some of this, the actual counting of things myself. So I would be there till about 3-4 in the morning, counting the number of garbage bags, weighing a sample set of them, actually even opening them and seeing what's in them, to really develop a mechanism to do this. I also remember counting the weight or measuring the weight of individual Subway sandwich wrappers to see what the weight of all that plastic and that paper wrapping is, so on and so forth, because none of this has been done really. There was no sort of guidebook. So it was a fascinating effort. What that really did was it illuminated a lot of the tokenism that was going on in event management. There was green event management at that time, but it was mainly focused on plastic water bottles. And I remember before the IPL, the primary criticism that the IPL was receiving was the firecrackers and the fact that these night matches cause a lot of electricity consumption. And we really knew that, come on, the IPL, will not become green by having candlelit matches and by having no fireworks. It's not really, that's not really the answer. I'm sure the answer is somewhere else as well. And really that's what emerged from our footprinting, is we realized that the movement of people and goods plus the hospitality, and shockingly, the television viewing of IPL has 7 times more impact than the direct impact of IPL. So it's almost like, they say that there's no such thing as an experiment where the experimenter is separate from the experiment. So our very act of viewing the IPL changes the IPL. And so it really brought into sharp relief these hidden factors, and hotel and air travel turned out to be the biggest piece of the pie. And while we were all chasing the small little changes, which are, of course, not to be discounted, they have an impact, but we were letting this big elephant in the room be completely unaddressed. And that's what we developed as part of the roadmap, was to really address hotel and air travel stay. Hotel stay and air travel as big parts of it, along with other things. But unfortunately, after that, the whole scandal broke with the IPL, and this greening roadmap was considered to be something that was dubious because of the previous IPL experience with the person who was then discarded, etc. So that really didn't go anywhere. The IPL was not green, and very surprisingly, 2 years ago, Schneider Electric, actually somebody who's been involved, Alok has been involved with, they approached us because they were the greening partner for the Rajasthan Royals, and that sort of kick-started this whole greening of IPL again. But unfortunately, it remained at offsetting, and that's the other thing that it really brought to the fore, is this fetish for seeing carbon offsetting as the panacea, the cure-all, that all we need to do is plant enough number of trees and we can all claim ourselves to be carbon neutral. And this whole offsetting approach was also laid bare during our work, because we realized that the IPL produces all its footprint in 1 year. In a few months, it does it. But the trees that you plant will do it over a long period of time. And I think this is something that most laypersons do not understand, is that offsetting happens at a much slower rate. And all that while, the carbon emissions of that one event are still in the air. It's still heating the earth. It's still hammering us with global heating. And this is something that was very hard for even the Rajasthan Royals to palate, because we said that if you want to call yourself carbon neutral, the offsetting has to happen in roughly the same time scale as your emissions. And that really became a bit of a contested issue. But I think we really need to fight for the fact that we cannot be taking credit for a lifetime of trees, which takes 30, 40 years to sequester all the carbon, and take all the credit in this year. Yeah. Because we really have 7 years to get this right.
There's no escaping reducing. There's no escaping the need, to change fundamentally how we, how our businesses function, how our societies function, how we function at home, in our homes, and so on. Can you, from this experience with the IPL, and because we've got, over 100 of our colleagues on this call, what would you, what advice would you give us as, as sort of employees of a very large conglomerate? What can we do both in our roles, to do exactly this, right? Make our, ensure that our companies are taking action and sort of reducing our impact. And, so how do we look at our roles differently, and how do we hold our organization more accountable for that change?
Okay, I'm glad you asked me this question, and I hope you're prepared for the answers. Okay, let's get into that. I think it's very important to recognize that there are externalities. No matter what story we construct, we all know that there are externalities that we would be really hard pressed to include in our thinking. Otherwise, very often we would stop doing some of the things that we're doing. And there are big imperatives, economic imperatives that push things irrespective of what we know to be the truth about things. So I really feel that anybody in the corporate world, especially Godrej, because there is a sort of goodwill that your organization has amongst people. I think y'all and Tata's, there's something to do with companies owned by Parsis. There is this positive prejudice, I guess, in favor of these companies, that they are gentler on the earth than their peers. One thing that I would really advocate for is to include the disaffected of your projects into your boardroom. Maybe not at the boardroom at the top level. But for example, Godrej Realty would, I think, be greatly benefited if you had the disaffected part of the design build team. So there's this concept of design build teams, right? Even in architecture, there's this whole building design studio approach. What if you include the voices directly of the residents of the village, of the peri-urban areas where your development is going to go, and include them and start having this uncomfortable dialogue across the privilege divide? Because there is somebody whose eggs are getting broken for us to eat our omelets. It cannot be otherwise, right? Otherwise, why is the income gap widening every year? In India, it is widening. So I think as employees who can do something within corporates, include that voice. I don't know what we will be able to do about it, but if we don't do it in this sort of safe space, the tensions could build to the level where the structures, the rubrics of our sane society, which is still functional, could really come down. You know, they say that if you don't visit the poor neighborhoods will visit us. And I don't mean it to sound like a threat, but really the tensions are so dire that we really need to find safe ways of listening to the disaffected. That's one thing I would say a corporate employee can do. Secondly, recognize that a lot of the green metrics, I've been involved with quite a few public limited companies. I'm not going to name them, but we have found massive amounts of misrepresentation and downright fraud and flaunting of their consents to operate. And there are plenty of consultants available who will sign off on anything because they want the next project with that organization. And we found this rampant deception going on where even global buyers, when they come to these plants, to these manufacturing sites, they're able to sort of basically deceive them into thinking that all these metrics that are being measured, I'm not saying all metrics are of course, doubtful and dubious, but there is a lot that's going on. So be aware that you might not really know the full truth. I think the idea of, there used to be these times when Emperor Akbar would walk around in disguise and check on things, like we hear about all these fables. I think it's time to really do that, where you as a company, without relying on consultants, etc., go really face the truth. Try to see, is this really as rosy as my metrics are telling me? And I would say practice this kind of healthy skepticism of your metrics yourself without relying on anybody outside.
That's really helpful. We've always sort of prided ourselves on being authentic about our sustainability journey so far, and not being one of those companies, and there are many out there that do a lot of PR and frankly greenwashing, right, around these, around their sustainability metrics. So, that's something that we endeavor definitely as a team to, to ensure that we stay true to, because it's core to who we are as a business and a 126-year-old sort of conglomerate, and a core part of our values. But that's really helpful. Can we think about bringing the people who are most affected by what we do into where decision making happens in our companies? And can each of us as Godrejites bring that voice, to different dimensions of our work? So thank you for that.
And I will say one thing, that the traditional third-party model, it's not truly third-party, because that person wants the next cycle of the engagement to continue. So it has to be somebody who has nothing to gain by looking at the truth. And I really feel that civil society organization, watchdogs, invite the watchdogs to help you become authentic.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat specifically around the No to CO2 project and what challenges you faced during that. So, if you want to just take that one, and then I can, ask another question.
Yeah. So No to CO2 was a non-profit organization that was actually the first response when I came back to India, because that time the discourse was all about carbon credits. Nobody was really looking at carbon accountability. So we created this India-specific emission factor database at that time, with the help then finally of Professor Amit Garg of IIM Ahmedabad, who validated our methods. And we were all greenhorns novices at that time. We created this tool, this calculator. It was quite successful. If I remember, I was even engaged with with at some point with HSBC at that time. And I know you've come from HSBC as well, Gayatri. Aloka Majumdar was there, and I think it was circulated amongst quite a few companies. But it was too early, and there was really no takers. Nobody was talking about individual carbon footprint of India, because India was considered to be a low emitter historically. And finally, when we realized that, okay, we could either be going down the individual route, focus on individual actions, or looking at system change, we said that, okay, we're not finding enough institutional support for no to CO2. And we sort of said that, okay, if somebody in the future wants to take it on, and now finally, after years and years, somebody discovered that no to CO2 had done all this work, and we are more than happy to share this. There's been, even Terry was interested at some point to create an India-specific carbon footprint calculator. They approached us, and we were more than happy to share all the quote-unquote IP. Build your own tool. We will provide all the sort of engine to be able to support such tools of realizing and minimizing a footprint. But we had to sort of put an end to that, at least overtly, to focus on this other mission. So there's another portal called onlyplanet.in, and I would recommend that people who are interested in individual carbon footprinting, we've advised that group quite a bit. Go look it up. It's a decent India-specific carbon footprint tool that takes a slightly different approach than we had taken. But yeah, one thing that I think is very vital for any carbon footprint calculator, if somebody's looking to build one, maybe Godrej is looking to build one, is to try to develop econometric factors. Because if you ask most people how much diesel do you use or how much kilowatt hours of electricity you use, most people wouldn't know it, but you would know how much you spend on things. And I think it's very important to be able to develop factors, and this can all be done by saying that, okay, in Bangalore, if I spend 800 rupees per month on electricity, what does it really mean in terms of kilowatt hours? Is all doable. If you tell me that I spend 1500 rupees on LPG, it's possible to convert it. So if we can come up with ways where literally your monthly budget or your spend, your credit card statement should be able to lead to your carbon footprint. And I think that can be done at an individual level to really make this a painless exercise. Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, I'm a big fan of this idea of an India-specific GHG database specifically for commodities, because as a business that has a very large scope 3 emissions across all of our business lines, right? We are literally forced to take on emission factors from the rest of the world. Nothing to do with our reality in India. So we've been doing some of our own studies on what is the emission factor of growing soybean in India. Not at all the same as soybean in the US or or anywhere in South America, which is what is globally considered. So maybe we can definitely pick up this thread at another time. In the meantime, I also wanted to, focus a little bit on the work that you're doing with the Informed Voter Project, because I think that is so critical, right? We sort of underestimate the fact that, we're all corporate employees, but we're all citizens, right, of India. And you already mentioned our buildings and our streets, but beyond that, how can we be better citizens in ensuring that there is climate adaptation, climate change mitigation, climate justice in India?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gayatri. Yeah, recognizing that paying your taxes and doing green consumption and voting. If that would have worked, we would not be on this call, frankly. Yeah, we'd all be somewhere on farm, maybe growing some permaculture crops and all of that. So that's not enough. We all need, if you have a dietary component of actions, yes, there can be lots of individual actions, but we need some public engagement. And I think a great place to start is, at least before elections, read manifestos. I remember, I don't want to paint the past in sepia tones, but this word manifesto was part of conversation during elections. So people would read. The manifesto was actually often published in newspapers, and you would read the Congress Party, the Janata Dal, the Samajwadi Party. That time the BJP was just a nascent force in the early 90s, etc. I remember this was part of what you would do, and you considered it as something that you were you held your head up high saying that, hey, you know what, I read the manifesto and I'm an informed person. So I think one thing we need to do is bring it back into vogue to read manifestos. And it's astonishing how detailed it is. I mean, these are massive documents. So that's one thing that we can start doing. And secondly, keep track of what these people are doing after they get elected. You know, we often lament, "Arey, in log ye to vote मांग के 5 साल के लिए गायब हो जाते हैं. They all disappear for 5 years. What do? We also disappear for 5 years. So it's a mutual disappearing act. And guess what? Democracy is vanishing in the interim. So we consider infotainment and consuming of hours and hours of rhetoric and all kinds of just distractions on television that count as political discourse as sufficient in terms of accountability. So, I mean, I don't want to toot our own horn, but definitely pay attention to when newspapers that are credible, when they publish report cards of your members of parliament, bring the cutting, keep it there, because when it comes time to vote, that's really what you should be deciding, not the last 3 months of, you know, doing ribbon cutting of some airport and some bridge and saying, "Arey, these people are development people." So I think we need to have a longer term view that accountability takes time and involvement. And there are some key moments. There are report cards that are often published by groups such as ADR. Well, ADR and Praja don't really do report cards. They do very metrics oriented things. But whenever this kind of stuff happens, store it and make it part of conversation. Mumbai Votes, for example, is endeavoring to publish annual report cards of MPs, MLAs, and corporators. And thirdly, I think read newspapers differently. Rather than just focusing on headlines, look for more contextual things that you can do something about. So if there's something about your MLA and your corporator and your member of parliament, that should really be very vital, which means you first need to know who your corporator is, who your MLA is, and who your elected, your member of parliament is. And recognizing that, yes, we can all be enamored by the national politics, but what are you going to do about it? Nothing right now. So start with your locus, your situation, and become the master of it.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. There are a couple of questions in the chat, which I'm just going to quickly read out. So there's one which is, I think, I don't know if it definitely cannot be answered on this call. It is enough for more than a PhD. What is the practical substitute for capitalism? What are the trade-offs? And what could be the potential benefits of a pivot?
Yes. So I would say a distributive politics, a distributive economics that brings back the ideas of E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful, that we can all have prosperity with less concentration. So if there is a model, an economic model, and there is this donut economics model, I think that's a very, I don't know if you'll have read Kate Raworth's work on the idea of donut economics. I think that is a great model for us to follow. We don't need to have a name for it. You know, the thing is that the mainstream never has to name itself, but the alternatives always do. Well, we don't need to have one theory that fits all. So distributive economics, transparent accountability where the corporations don't lobby and influence policies. I think the lobbying power of capitalism needs to be cut off so that people can influence it. And I'm not sitting against, in a committee that is looking at, for example, air conditioning related issues. We shouldn't be having DuPont and air conditioning manufacturers at the same level as citizens, right? So I think this interference needs to be addressed, and this all requires change, legislation change at the judicial level, for example. But I do feel that a more redistributive economics is an answer to capitalism, and making sure that there are caps. Just like there's minimum salary, I think one answer is a maximum salary. A salary ratio, this has been attempted. C-Balance also, by the way, we have a salary ratio of 1:4. We, no matter who you are, you're not going to be able to make more than 4 times the salary of the lowest level. And in most corporate companies in India, the average is 1:400, which means that the top person in the company can work for 5 hours, like pull off a half day, and that's considered to be equal value as a full year of anybody else. There's nobody like that. So I think we need to have a maximum salary if we have to bring capitalism to heel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Anand who's from our Aztec life sciences business has actually said something sort of similar for emissions, saying that there should be a cap for emissions. So it has to be compulsory that there is only this much that we can emit. So yeah, no, these are the tough questions, really, right? Because it's essentially flipping on its head everything we know to be real and true. But I'd also just like to caution that when we ask these questions around is there an alternative to this, right? It's just because something the alternative doesn't seem clear, or there's no ready-made solution, it doesn't mean that we accept anything that is not doing the job,
not working, yeah,
and human society needs. And I think it's really on all of us to come up with what that means for us, both as business leaders and and citizens. Gagan has asked, what are the top 3 most impactful things we can do to reverse climate change as individuals?
Okay, the top 3 things would be make the life of cars impossible. Large cars, for sure. Large cars need to be rationed. There should only be that many number of car license plates that should be made available in a city. That for sure is a thing. So give up large cars. No, it's not about electric cars. You're still going to be stuck in electric car traffic jams. Yeah. And electricity is not green, by the way. Okay, so I think that's one big thing. The second is give up on domestic flying if possible, as much as possible, at least for certain distances. Like, try to experiment with a flight-free year. That is, usually if you do your footprinting, your one flight will undo all your vegetarian meals, all your veganism, all your paper bags instead of plastic bags will be undone by one flight from Mumbai to Delhi and back will be undone. So I think flying and big cars, I would say, are the big things. And finally, I would say try to culturally practice no buy days, like days where you don't buy anything. So for example, no buy Diwali, no buy Christmas, make things instead of buying things, and practice this idea of I think making is something that is so beautiful. It's convivial. It brings you together with your family. So I think this idea of making things again with our own hands is something that we started doing a lot of during COVID and all, I know. But maybe that is one way to also give less power to businesses and take more power back to be producers rather than just conscious consumers.
Yeah. That's a great one. I would like to add one, actually inspired by what you said about the IPL, the impact of us watching the IPL having such a large emission, right? Similarly, just in our day-to-day lives, the amount of media that we forward on WhatsApp or that we share on WhatsApp, even if we want to say hi to somebody, it's with like a whole image, right? This has a massive impact, right? Good morning can be just text also, or, maybe not say it at all unless you're face to face. But we underestimate how much energy is being used just in with what we're holding in our hands.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily required at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. There is a movement around the world for what's called digital sufficiency. By the way, I just wanted to add one more thing. I think a very important thing that individuals can do is to become detectives of their organizations that they're either working in or going to get employed in. So audition, because I think right livelihood is very important. You can be doing all of this in your personal life, but if your livelihood, your major part of the day is going and furthering the wrong direction in society, then it behooves you to examine that, to evaluate that. I think every individual should put right livelihood as a very important criteria for who they give their talent to. But talking about digital, so there was a movement that got started where people said that just because I can stream everything at 1080 doesn't mean that I have to. So there are people who are voluntarily now downloading and even watching YouTube videos at 480p, which I know people are like, oh my God, how will I survive with this kind of fuzziness? So there is this concept of digital sufficiency, of voluntarily cutting your camera off sometimes during conversations, but also, for example, voluntarily streaming. And I know a lot of people do this, Netflix and all of that. That's like life for a lot of people. But at least we can start streaming a little bit at a lower rate. That's a very practical, small thing, I guess we can do.
Yeah, great. Utkrist Varma, you've asked, how do you quantify the changes made due to human interactions in terms of climate? I'm not sure I understand the question. Vivek, if you do, if not, Utkrist, can you put your hand up and we will ask you to explain?
Yes, I would like some. Does that mean the travel?
I'm not sure. Utkrist, do you want Nachiket, if you can bring him in to ask this question, that would be helpful. In the meanwhile, I'll ask a question while he gets here, which is, what makes you positive and hopeful? I know we started off on what keeps you up at night, but what makes you positive and hopeful? Where do you see sort of, change happening, progress happening, and people really sort of organizations, communities taking things in their own hands and, being the change? What inspires you?
I mean, lots of things do, but I'm just trying to. I think this conscience, the fact that the most diabolical, human being, overtly in the actions, has a conscience, and I've seen it even in the places where I thought I would never find it. I think that has been astonishing. The idea that eventually we are living in a limited world, and our capacity to eventually apprehend that thought, comprehend it, and recognize that reality is going to be forced on us if we don't voluntarily accept it. I think that capacity gives me a lot of hope. And I'll give you one example. So we had created a group of 8 builder developers in Mumbai and Pune, and we did some radical work with them to go into their own stories of patriarchy and how their real estate empires are reproducing patriarchy, because it's about male domination of the landscape. And it's all rooted in that. And after a few months and months of working with them, one of them actually voluntarily renounced. This person had come to pick me up on the first time in a big BMW for a chat in a coffee shop in Pune. And after 6 months of this, I found out this person had sold their BMW and came to pick me up in a Hyundai Santro. I've never seen a real estate, company CEO, like he's the owner of the company, come in a small little car. And he told me that, I could have done all this efficiency with my light bulbs and all this, but I knew where I was. And this person apparently sold their own luxury apartment and went to live in a middle-class home that they are themselves making for other people. Now, I think this kind of radical renunciation is, especially amongst the powerful, gives me hope. Whenever I see it, a radical reduction and renunciation is one of the sources of hope. And people voluntarily saying, enough, I've done it. I've traveled the world. I have done all of this stuff. Now it's time for me to be in one place and address the issues of that place. Reroute yourself. Not being a boomer all the time, but sticking to a place and staying here. I think this gives me a lot of hope whenever I see somebody who's rooted in something rather than trying to solve the whole world's problems. So yeah, these kind of stories inspire me and give me hope.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's good. I mean, it's wonderful to hear that, right? Because it's that human nature to sometimes get jaded and think that the problem is too large to be solved. But obviously it's not, and there are, there are people and communities that are doing this. With that, we've sort of reached the top of the hour, and I just want to take the last minute that we have to really thank you so much for taking out an hour of your very busy day and being so candid with us, right? These are the sorts of conversations that we really value, because they they push us to think and to do better. And it's so rare to come across someone who's willing to be so honest and so candid, and sort of speak to us so openly. So, really on behalf of all of Godrej, which is spread across the world. Really from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. And we are, and we hope to sort of collaborate with you and potentially do some work together as we advance on this sustainability journey of ours.
Thank you so much, and for participating and really creating this environment where I felt safe to say what is the truth, because really it's too late to pretend that these things don't exist. Otherwise, we will lose this earth. We will lose each other, and let's focus on well-being and life for everybody, for everything. So,
thank you so much, Vivek.
Thank
everyone for joining. SuperHuman Race team, thank you all, and of course our Godrej team for putting this together. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.